June Bugs and Summer's Nights. Heart Stories from the Midwest. Written by Donnis Slusser Crane. Narrated by Donnis Slusser Crane. Chapter 1, I Am Born. A long time ago, in 1948, I was born on Christmas Eve. Mama and Daddy were thrilled to have me. They wondered what good things they had done that year, so that Santa Claus would bring them this tiny, red-headed baby girl as a present to them for Christmas. I came 3 weeks early, and I only weighed 6 pounds, 3 ounces. Mama's due date was actually in the middle of January 1949. My whole life, I have always wanted to be early to events. I get anxious when I'm late, so I have always been punctual. Maybe now I know why. In my baby book, Mama wrote that I was a fussy baby. Mama tried everything she could think of to soothe me, but she was at her wit's end. She didn't know what else she could do to satisfy me. My older sister, Phyllis, tried to help out by putting nickels in my mouth when I cried. Uncle Charlie, Daddy's brother, teased them and said, "Send her back. Trade her for a boy. You've already got a girl." My older sister's name was Phyllis Maria. She was born on July 20, 1947. But Mom and Daddy wanted to keep their new baby. They named me Donnis Erlene after Mama's childhood playmates, her nephews, Donald and Earl Mulder. We lived in Wichita, Kansas in a community called Plainview. The community had been built by the United States government during World War II, close to the Boeing Airplane Manufacturing Company. At that time, the Air Force needed bomber planes for the war, and the workers needed housing. Boeing kept building a few warplanes, but after the war, Boeing also began to build passenger airplanes. Daddy worked for the Boeing company. At Plainview, there were 4 separate living spaces in one long building where Mama and Daddy lived on East Bruce Street. It was called a fourplex. Their rent was $32 a month, which included water, electricity, and coal. They burned the coal in a small stove in the middle of the living room to keep their apartment warm. Daddy had to walk a block down the street to get coal out of a large coal bin. He would carry it home in a bucket. 3 other families lived in the same building, 1 apartment for each family. There were several buildings like the one we lived in. Chapter 3, Second Christmas. When my second Christmas and first birthday were near, Mama and Daddy took me and my older sister Phyllis, who was just 2 1/2 years old, to see Santa Claus and his reindeer. A lot of other children from Plainview had come to see Santa also. Mama and Daddy waited patiently in line for their turn to talk to Santa. Phyllis was afraid of Santa and would not sit on his lap. But when it was my turn, Daddy placed me in Santa's arms. Santa wore a warm, soft coat, and it was comfortable there in his lap. Excited by the lights and sounds of the crowd, I grabbed Santa's snow-white beard with both of my little hands. I giggled and sputtered and started to tug on his beard. I held on tight and would not let go. "Ow!" Santa yelped. "Donnie girl, let go," Daddy chided. Daddy tried to pry my fingers loose, but I just kept tugging and giggling. Daddy finally got Santa's beard loose from my little hands. "I am so sorry, Santa," Daddy said. "She's got a mighty strong tug in those little hands," Santa said, rubbing his chin. Back in the car and on the way home, Daddy chuckled and said to Mama, "I wonder what Santa will bring to Donnis for Christmas this year. I hope he doesn't remember what she did." Mama said, "Oh, Max, I wouldn't worry about that. Santa loves all little children. He knows what excited little girls are likely to do." I turned 1 year old on the day before Christmas. Do you think Santa Claus brought me anything? Mama did not record anything in my baby book. Chapter 4. Move to the Old Farmhouse. On October 19, 1951, my sister Lonetta Louise was born at Wesley Hospital in Wichita. She was named after Mama's dad, Lonnie, and Daddy's dad, Louis. Daddy told us that twin girls were born that same night to a couple named Hughes. Daddy and Mr. Hughes both worked at Boeing. They took a break and went to eat breakfast. When they got back to the waiting room, all 3 little baby girls had arrived. When Mama heard the nurses talking about twins, she thought they were hers. Our family had 3 little ones at home already. Phyllis was only 4 years and 3 months old. Mama said she wanted to go back to sleep and not wake up. The next summer, we moved from Plainview to a farmhouse southeast of Augusta. Daddy said, "It's been some time since anyone has lived there, June. It's pretty well growed up with weeds." The driveway leading to the house was just 2 tracks with weeds in between. The people who lived there before left a mother cat. Mama named her Josie. Because of the way the cat crept along, she reminded Mama of an old woman back at Max Creek. Josie was gentle with us kids, and we learned how to be good to her when we played so she wouldn't scratch us. She had 4 little kittens. 2 were black as midnight and 2 striped like their mama. Daddy said Josie was a good mouser. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew we had some cute little kitties to play with. Phyllis and I dressed them in our dolly's clothes. Josie was calm while we handled her babies, but she stayed right there with us and would not go away. Mama learned to drive a car while we lived at the farmhouse. Daddy worked 3rd shift at Boeing. One morning he had gone to bed after he got home from work. Mama loaded us kids into the little Henry J to practice driving. She stayed on the country road and she drove slowly. She had driven for just a little while when it was time to come home and make breakfast. So she tried to turn around in the middle of the road like Daddy taught her, but she backed too far into the ditch. Oops! The tailpipe got stuck in the mud. The car died. She was stuck. "What am I going to do?" she said out loud. "What?" I asked her. "Never mind, Donna," she said. "Everything is going to be okay, but I need to get help somehow." Tommy began to cry and woke baby Lonetta. Mama got out of the car and tried to shush both of them. I tried to help by feeding Lonetta her bottle. I could tell Mama was scared. Before long, a man in a pickup truck came along the road and stopped. He was surprised to see this little slip of a girl like Mama alone on a country road, but he was especially surprised to learn that all 4 of the little kids in the car belonged to her. He volunteered to help her by driving us back to the farmhouse to get Daddy. The man waited out in the yard until Mama went upstairs and woke Daddy. Mama told him she'd had a wreck. Daddy jumped out of bed, worried that any of us was hurt. Mama calmed him down. Everyone was okay. But Daddy needed to go with that nice man back to where the car was. When they got back to the car, Daddy saw that the car was only stuck. So he cleaned the dirt and mud out of the exhaust pipe. The car started right up. Daddy thanked the nice man, and then he drove home. Mama was afraid Daddy would be mad, but he wasn't. He told her, "Backing up too far is common. Lots of people make that same mistake, honey." Daddy was just grateful none of us was hurt. There was a small barn at this old farm place. Phyllis and Tommy and I would climb the ladder up to the hayloft and jump out the haymow door. Daddy would stand below in a mound of hay and catch us. It was not unusual for us to jump to Daddy. We trusted him, and he always caught us. The kitchen and living room were on the bottom floor of the farmhouse. All of us slept in the upstairs bedrooms. There was no bathroom in the house, so we had to use an outhouse. Mama and Daddy enjoyed when our cousins David and Sandy, and sometimes Daddy's brother Uncle Charlie and Aunt Zella, would come to visit and share a meal. In the evening, they would play cards. The house had a pointed roof above our bedrooms. I shared a feather bed with my sister Phyllis. I was scared of a small closet door under the eaves of the house in our bedroom. I thought sure monsters lived behind that door. I was sure I could hear voices coming from behind that door. It was scary. One night, I hollered for Daddy to come upstairs. When he got to our room, he opened the little door. He yelled, "Get out of there, monsters! Go live in someone else's house." Daddy would then go in there, scrunching down so he could fit through the little door to see if the monsters had left. When he came back out, he told me that the monsters had left and they wouldn't bother us anymore. One night, while it was very dark outside, I woke up and had to go to the bathroom. I lay awake for a long time. Listening, I only heard the sound of the trees whispering together outside. Mama had put a chamber pot in the corner of our bedroom. We could squat over it in the middle of the night instead of going all the way outside, but I was afraid to get up. I was still scared of the monsters behind that little door. I called for Daddy. He came to help me, but he decided I should go outside to the outhouse. Daddy picked me up and carried me to the outdoor toilet. On the wooden walk leading from the kitchen to the outhouse, Josie the cat jumped from the ground onto the walkway and startled Daddy. He almost dropped me and said some naughty words to Josie. After I had done my business, Daddy and I walked back to my bedroom, but I was still scared. Daddy opened the little door and said, "See, Donnis, there are no monsters in this closet. It just leads to the attic where we store things we're not using. There are just some old boxes and things. Go to sleep, Donnie girl. I'll stay right here and I won't let the monsters in." So I snuggled under the covers in the big bed close beside Phyllis while Daddy sat in a chair next to our bed. The next Sunday, Aunt Maxine and her kids came out to the farm. All of us kids went to play in the hayloft. Josie was up there with us, and I saw her chase a mouse. She didn't catch it that time. It escaped under a pile of hay. Early in the evening, Mama called us to supper of brown beans and fried potatoes. She had cooked enough for everyone, and they were so good. After we ate, we played games on the floor of the living room, and someone saw a mouse scamper across the room. Daddy got the broom and started chasing the mouse, trying to hit it with the broom. He looked funny running around the room, pounding the broom on the floor in the direction the mouse had run. At one point, the mouse, trying to avoid Daddy's broom and also trying to avoid all of us kids and Mama and Aunt Maxine in the room, turned and started running toward Daddy. Daddy was as scared as the mouse. He was doing a crazy dance trying to stay away from the mouse. We only spent the summer of 1952 at that old farmhouse. Daddy said the drive to Boeing was just too long, and he didn't like leaving Mama and us kids in the country while he was gone at night. He said the house was not going to keep us warm in the winter, so we moved from the farm in the fall of 1952 back to Cedardale Street in Oaklawn. We took Josie the cat with us. She was a good mouser. Chapter 5. Moved to Cedardale Street in Oaklawn. It was time for my sister Phyllis to start first grade, and the schools didn't have provisions for kindergarten. There were not enough chairs and tables for all of the kids. Mama did not like it and hated leaving Phyllis there, even for half a day. Most of the students had to sit on a rug on the floor. Mama complained to Daddy, saying, "Even in our one-room country schoolhouse up on Dry Ridge, all the kids had a place to sit." Daddy patiently told her that Plainview and Oaklawn had been built by the U.S. government during World War II, close to the Boeing Airplane Manufacturing Company. During that time, the Air Force needed bomber planes for the war, and the workers needed housing. After the war, Boeing kept building a few warplanes, but also began to build passenger airplanes. It still needed workers, and those workers needed a place to live. The soldiers returning from the war were marrying and starting families just like Daddy. A lot of them were needed to work at Boeing, and they were living there in Oaklawn and Plainview, like we were, to be close to the Boeing plant. So there were a lot of children of the soldiers' families starting to school in both communities. The schools were overwhelmed with the number of kids. Today they call us baby boomers. Mama didn't care that there were a lot of soldiers and their families needing housing, or a lot of kids starting to school at the same time. What she cared about was that her little girl had to sit on the floor with her books to go to school. Daddy worked the graveyard shift at Boeing. He slept in the morning, but then he got up and spent time with his family during the afternoon and evening. Our bedtime was 8 p.m., but Mama and Daddy stayed up later. Daddy went to work late at night and came home in the morning just before Phyllis had to go to school. Years later, Daddy told me the name graveyard shift came from ancient England. England is a very small country. They started running out of places to bury people, so they would dig up coffins and would take the bones to a bone house and reuse the grave. When reopening all the coffins, 1 out of 25 coffins was found to have scratch marks on the inside, and the English people realized they had been burying people alive. So the practice became that they would tie a string on the wrist of the corpse, lead it through the coffin and up through the ground, and tie it to a bell. Someone would have to sit out in the graveyard all night, the graveyard shift, to listen for the bell. Thus, someone could be saved by the bell, or was considered to be a dead ringer. There was nothing between the back of our house on Cedardale Street and the river except weeds and a big sunflower field. One day, I came screaming out of the sunflower field, running toward the house. Tommy was chasing me, scaring me with the head of a snake. In his other hand, he was carrying a butcher knife. Luckily, Daddy was there. He took both the knife and the snake head away from Tommy and spanked him. Daddy was mad at Tommy for running with a knife in his hand. "But Daddy, what about the snake?" I cried. "Oh, Donnie girl, don't be silly. It's nothing but a little old garter snake," Daddy replied. "But Daddy," I said again. Behind Daddy's back, Tommy was grinning ear to ear, crossing his eyes, sticking out his tongue, and generally poking fun at me. That rascally little brother wasn't afraid of snakes. One night, a big rainstorm came roaring into Wichita. The weather was threatening tornadoes. Mama didn't have anywhere to take her family. Oaklawn didn't have a storm shelter, and our house was built on a slab of concrete. There wasn't even so much as a place under the house where we could take shelter. So Mama carried Lonetta and took Tommy by the hand. She told me to hold on to Tommy's other hand and told Phyllis to hold my hand that Tommy wasn't holding. She made a chain of us. She was going to lead us through the sunflower field toward the river. She knew there was a bridge that crossed the river and a concrete culvert at the side of the field where she thought we'd be safe. She thought if she could get us to that culvert, any wind or tornado would go right over our heads and we'd be safe. In our playtimes, we had crawled into the culvert on our hands and knees. We knew where it was. So Mama got us ready to go. She opened the door of the house. Bang! It immediately jerked away from her grip and slammed shut, leaving us inside. She started to grab the handle again when she heard very clearly, "Don't go. If you go, you and those babies will all drown." Mama knew she'd heard the voice of God. Thankfully, she acted on her faith and took us kids back into the house and put us to bed, and then went to bed herself. She slept soundly through the night, confident that the Lord was going to protect her little family. Daddy was glad we were safe, but it scared him to know that we had no shelter. He made up his mind that day to move us out of Wichita and out to his hometown of Cheney, Kansas. It meant he had further to drive every day to work, but most important, his family was safer. Mama was happy because she knew her kids would be going to smaller schools with fewer kids in each class. Chapter 6. Our First TV. While we were on Cedardale Street in Wichita, Daddy went to the Oklahoma Tire and Supply Store and bought our first television. It was a 14-inch Bendix. The TV was black and white, housed in a blonde-colored case that stood on 4 tall legs. It had rabbit ears to use as antenna. Daddy and Mama told the man they couldn't pay cash and didn't have enough to even make the down payment. With 4 little kiddos, they could never save enough to pay cash. Our family was living from paycheck to paycheck. The store manager said to take the TV home and come back the next payday and make the $10 down payment, and every payday after that to make a $3 payment. So that's what Daddy did until it was paid off. The evening he brought our new television home, he placed it in the living room, and we kids were fascinated to hear and see people inside that television set. We were amazed, and I wondered how they did that. I remember that evening the Ed Sullivan Show was on, and there were people singing and dancing. It was spellbinding. When Mama called us to supper, Tommy and I did not want to go into the table because we could not see the TV from the table. Mama said we could just listen to the program, but that wasn't good enough. Tommy and I would get a big bite of food and race to the living room and watch the television and chew. When the food in our mouths was swallowed, we'd race back into the table and grab another big bite and then race back to the living room to chew it. We were in such a hurry that, before long, food was strung all over the table, all over our chairs, all over ourselves, and all over the floor on our trips to the living room. After a while, Mama had enough. In a stern voice, she said, "Donnis Arlene, Thomas Eugene, sit down and eat, or I will turn the television off." I don't think she wanted to because she was enjoying the Sullivan Show too. Daddy said, "Oh, Mommy, they're just excited. Leave them be." Mama wasn't happy. So Daddy made us a deal. There was a large jar of whole dill pickles on the table, and he told me and Tommy that if we could eat one whole pickle without scrunching up our faces at the sourness, we could take our plate and sit on the floor in the living room to finish our suppers. Tommy crawled up onto the table and, always ready for a bet, said, "I can eat more pickles than you can, Donnis." "Phooey," I said, and the contest was on. We tucked into that jar of sour pickles like our lives depended on it. We'd take a bite, and with a poker face that would impress any card player, chew until it was gone. After we ate several pickles each, Mama gave up and told us to just go ahead and take our plates into the living room where we could finish our suppers and watch the television. I don't remember being very hungry after all those pickles. There on Cedardale Street, 3-year-old Tommy decided to teach baby Lonetta to jump to me. Lonetta trusted her older brother, and when Tommy put her up onto the dining room table, held up his arms like he remembered Daddy doing, and yelled, "Jump to me," Lonetta jumped. Tommy was not big enough to catch her. She landed right on top of him, and together they toppled to the floor. It flattened them both. They both cried, but Tommy hushed up pretty quickly. Lonetta kept crying and holding her hand. Her finger was sticking out at an odd angle. Mama and Daddy took Lonetta to the emergency room. The crash to the floor broke Lonetta's right index finger. Mama was still unhappy on Cedardale Street, mostly because Phyllis did not have a proper chair and desk at school. And the next year I was supposed to start kindergarten. Between Christmas and New Year's Day 1953, our family moved to Cheney into an old house owned by a Mrs. Loomis. It was in the first block north of the railroad tracks on Adams Street. I started to kindergarten in January, and Phyllis went into first grade. All my classmates had started school together the previous September, and they knew each other. I was the new kid in class. I had just turned 5 years old on Christmas Eve. I was also the youngest one in my class. I've been telling stories since the age of 3, and I'm happy to have published the books of my father, Max, brother Tommy, and sister Lonetta Slusser Knutson. All of our books are published through Amazon and Kindle. www.amazon.com/author/Donnis Crane.